Tappy has just released Arc 7 Chapter 31, and this video will be a summary of that chapter. I highly recommend you also check out my Arc 7 Chapter 30 summary. Anyways, let's begin. Al grabs Subaru and prevents him from self-harming, telling him to stop what he's doing. Subaru came to his senses and felt bad for his actions. Al was put off by Subaru's voice and demeanor, almost scaring him, wondering why he was, of course, acting this way. Al also wondered why Subaru was so disheartened by that girl's words. Subaru was alarmed that Al eavesdropped on Subaru and Rem's conversation. Al explained that he was coming to call Subaru, but since Subaru and Rem were having a conversation which seemed very important, he waited around and he did not want to interrupt him. Al states that he isn't lying, but then he states that Subaru was acting like it was the end of the world, so what Al did was follow Subaru to make sure he was okay. Al then pointed to his helmet, essentially indicating that his worries for Subaru was correct, considering he saw Subaru smashing his head into a wall. Subaru asks what Al meant by what he said earlier. Al was confused, and Subaru referred back to the statement about dying or feeling the same way about dying. Of course, those words had a profound effect on Subaru. However, as Al goes on to explain himself, Subaru states that Al must know something, and he continued to stare at Al. However, due to Al's helmet, he couldn't really tell what facial expressions or emotions Al was making at the moment. Al states that he's an old man, and he's been in the same situations as Subaru. Al explains he's been embarrassed to death before, and he's had the feeling of wanting to die, so he can relate to how Subaru is feeling currently. However, when Al gets into that sort of emotion, Priscilla just gives him a look as if he were an insect or bug. Al continues to laugh it off as he imparts his experiences onto Subaru, and he taps Subaru's shoulder. Subaru is still unsure after hearing this, and Subaru now understands why Al wears a helmet. It's very hard for him to sort of gauge Al's true intentions since he always wears a helmet. Subaru ponders upon whether or not Al knows about return by death. However, he concludes that Al doesn't know. After all, if Al knew about return by death, he would be able to demonstrate it in some form. For example, similar to how Roswell touched upon it at the Sanctuary in Arc 4. Furthermore, just because you're summoned into this world, it doesn't mean you'll get a special power. Al, for example, is missing an arm, so if he had a power, surely he would have prevented that. Subaru thinks to himself, if he lost his arm, he could use return by death to avoid it. However, something catches Subaru's attention. He looks at his arm and realizes that by now, he's lost a lot of limbs. The only reason why he has all of his legs and arms currently is due to the fact that he does have return by death. If he continued to live in some of those loops, he would actually be missing some limbs. After all, Subaru was someone who would not rely on return by death. If he did, then what would be the criteria of using return by death? If he lost a finger, for example, would he then reset? What would be the cutoff point to use return by death? Continuing with that line of thinking, Subaru did not use return by death for the sake of Ricardo's arm at Prestella, or even for the sake of Mazelda's leg. Subaru states that he's a hypocrite because he isn't decisive when coming to use return by death. He was powerless and weak. As Subaru continued to bash himself, Al smacked Subaru, and Subaru was wondering what was up. Al pointed his finger at Subaru and started talking. Al asked why Subaru was so stunned by the girl's words, and why was he acting so pathetic over a few words. Al continues and explains that he has high hopes for Subaru. Subaru is shocked to hear that Ao actually has expectations for him. But Ao nods and talks about Subaru's speech at Prestella about how Subaru created an illusion that he was a hero to lift the spirits of the people of Prestella. Even if Rem turned him down, it doesn't take away from his other achievements. Rem, who had forgotten, Louis, who regressed into a child, Flop, Abel, Medium, and the Shadrakians wouldn't know of Subaru's work and achievements. Priscilla knew of it, but it was doubtful if she would remember it. Ao states that he hasn't forgotten those words, and Subaru needs to fight and live up to what he stated he would do, so Ao wouldn't let Subaru die. As Subaru thinks to himself, he closes his eyes, and the echo of the words, "You are not a hero," constantly invades his ears. Subaru explains to Ao during this that he relied on Rem's words, and because of them he succeeded at the Sanctuary, Prestella, and at the Pleiades Watchtower. Rem woke up and lost her memories, but Subaru was happy. Those were the words which inspired him, which allowed him to conquer all of the hardships that he faced. However, Ao has a simple solution. Then he should get it back. Subaru was shocked by this answer. He looked at Ao and stumbled backwards, but Ao stepped towards him. Subaru was backed against the wall, but Ao stretched out his arm and blocked Subaru from escaping. Ao leaned in so his helmet was touching Subaru's forehead, and he explained that he simply needed to meet the expectations and confidence of the girl. A bad result could be overturned with a good result. With that statement from Ao about regaining confidence and reputation, it made sense. Back at the royal capital, when Subaru made a fool out of himself in front of Emilia and the royal guards, it was the same thing. Yet Subaru was able to regain the confidence, trust, and reputation of Emilia that he had lost. And the way he did this was through his actions, by defeating the White Whale and defeating the Sin Archbishop of Sloth. Subaru didn't get to those achievements by smashing his head into a wall. Subaru then realizes this and he states verbally that he's an idiot. Even if Rem didn't see Subaru as a hero, Subaru is still Rem's hero, and he will conduct himself in a way which isn't pathetic. After all, Subaru is the only one who knows Rem and can help Rem get home. Subaru states that he is Rem's hero, and Ao notices the confidence in Subaru's voice and asks him if he's more energized. Subaru says he is, but to get away from him, since Ao was essentially pinning him to a wall. As Ao steps backwards, Subaru realizes that Ao essentially bandaged Subaru's issue. The fatal wound was still there, caused by Rem's words. If Subaru saw Rem, he would falter. How he would solve the issue is not something he can conclude in his head now. It will be something that crops up when he sees Rem. Furthermore, on the topic of using Return by Death to keep being an illusionary hero was also something Subaru was indecisive about. Ao wanted to ask Subaru a question, wondering more about Rem's position, namely the fact that Rem isn't Emilia or Beatrice, yet she can somehow wound Subaru so easily. Subaru thinks to himself to see if Rem and Ao are acquainted, but they aren't. Yet Subaru was confused about Ao's attitude since he asked the question in a very serious tone. Subaru could sense the urgency and heat in Ao's gaze. Subaru explains that Rem is one of their members but was eaten by the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. Ao actually understands and starts nodding. Ao states that Rem reminds him of someone, and Subaru asks if it was Ram, and Ao says yes. Subaru didn't know that Ao actually knew Ram, but Ao states that they aren't really acquaintances, but they're related in some way. Either way, Al concludes that they're twin sisters and the next step is to reunite them. Subaru agrees and Al states that he will help Subaru reunite Ram with Rem. Subaru was actually shocked, but Al joked saying that the princess might not like it, but he decided he would help Subaru, albeit he only has one arm worth of manpower. Subaru asks if Al is helping because he knows Ram, but Al explains it, saying that it's actually for Subaru. Since Subaru is going to be a hero, you need to help the girl also. Subaru states he isn't trying to be a hero, however Al cuts him off stating, "No, you will be a hero, brother. No, Natsuki Subaru." The tension was then cut by Al joking that sometimes bluffing is good for lazy people like him and Subaru, and he walked away laughing. Subaru stood there thinking about Al's cooperation, which actually made him feel positive. But from now on, Subaru would be Rem's hero, and therefore he had to keep his chest up, legs wide, and straighten his back as he walked forward. As Subaru thought to himself, the words echoed in his mind. "You will be a hero, brother. No, Natsuki Subaru." Well, honestly, my thoughts on the chapter was that Tappei kind of trolled us. He didn't really address the main issues about like return by death. Honestly, this was essentially an Aldebaran rezero speech. And I'm not sure why, but Aldebaran wants to help Subaru. He wants to make Subaru a hero. And it's like he's got some form of investment in Subaru to help him. Again, we don't know why Al is doing this or why he wants Subaru to be this hero. But this was again another case of the, Arc 3, we had Rem doing the whole From Zero speech. In Arc 4, you had Otto doing the From Zero speech. In Arc 5, you had, Subaru's speech to the people of Pristella. In Arc 6, you had the Stand Up speech from Rem. And now in Arc 7, you got the Aldebaran speech. So this seems to be the sort of turning point where most likely the arc will actually start going now. But yeah, Al is really suspicious, and let's just see where it goes from here.